So welcome everybody, and today we're welcoming you to our community of practice and Indigenous youth engagement and leadership in emergency preparedness. And this is it's like a special guest edition because we actually had a different topic initially planned, but I was just so delighted to have our special guest today. So we have a bit of a special session today. But before we begin, just as well, my name is Astrid Arame, for those of you who don't know me just yet, and I'm a manager of cities with Communities Building Belonging. It's previously called Deepening Community. We just actually changed our name to Communities Building Belonging because we felt that was actually more reflective of the work that we're doing. And so we begin this community of practice by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. And as settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And as part of our commitment to Canada's truth and reconciliation process, we recognize the importance of land recognitions as one small way of honoring and demonstrating respect for the diverse histories of all Indigenous peoples. And as for myself, I'm joining you today from the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. Tiohtià:ke, or colonially known as Montreal, has been historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. And also, I wanted to take a moment to say that celebrate that June is actually Indigenous month, and yesterday we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day. And for generations, many Indigenous groups and communities have celebrated their culture and heritage on June 21st, which was yesterday, which is around the time of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. And the Indigenous Peoples Day is really for all people in Canada to recognize and celebrate the culture and contributions of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Indigenous peoples in Canada. And finally, it's also Filipino Heritage Month as well. So, and hopefully you had a chance to check out some events in your community around you as well for this. As to for technical considerations, we have you covered. We're recording this, and we'll share the slides and any links, as well as recording after the call. And if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to use the chat box. And if you have any technical difficulties, let us know. And yes, so let me just see if oops, there we go. I'm going to try and, there we go. So, and before we get into our session, I just wanted to also invite you all to turn on your camera, come off mute, and introduce yourself, share your name, your organization, and which lands you're calling from. So we just get to know each other a little bit. Some of us already know each other a little bit, but I know we have some new faces here today, so it'd be lovely to get to know each other a little better. So I'll invite Natalie to get us started.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Natalie Swift. I'm here at the City of Williams Lake in the traditional lands of the Tl'aco, or in English, the Williams Lake First Nation. And I am the city's recovery coordinator, focused on recovery from a large flood we had in 2020 that took out a bunch of bridges. And I'll let Dave introduce himself here.
Good morning. My name is Dave Dixon. I'm the Director of Emergency Support Services for the city and the Cariboo Regional District. Have been involved for the last 25 years. Our community, we evacuated in excess of 25,000 people in the summer of 2017. And yeah, so I'm involved in emergency preparedness.
Thank you so much, Nat and Dave. Welcome. Who would you like to pass it on to?
Let's pass it on to Santana on the screen. You're right nearby.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Santana Drever. I'm calling in from Esquimalt and Songhees territory. and I'm working for the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations as a policy intern, but I'm really trying to focus in on their emergency management department, coming from the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, working on the Indigenous Peoples Policy branch as well, doing a lot of like co-development of the new legislation. So good morning, and I'll pass it on to Cheryl. Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Cheryl Evans. I'm the Director of Flood and Wildfire Resilience at the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. We're based at the University of Waterloo. And I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Six Nations of Grand River, Haudenosaunee, and Wyandot peoples. And I'm very pleased to be here today.
Who would you want to pass it on to, Cheryl? Welcome. So lovely to have you.
I had to run out for a second and talk to my daughter. So Sepia, have you had a chance to introduce yourself yet?
No, I haven't. Thanks, Cheryl. So I'm Sepia Sharma. I'm a community health specialist with Fraser Health. And my role falls under Healthier Communities, which is under population health. And in my role, I coordinate the Healthier Communities Partnership Table that includes the police and the fire and the doctors and all of those folks. So climate change is definitely one of the issues that we are working at. Thank you. And I will pass it on to Lily.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today in this session. Thank you to Astrid for inviting Santana and I to speak as guest speakers. I'm calling in from the beautiful traditional unceded and surrendered territory of the Sinixt. The Sinixt were declared extinct under the Indian Act, but Elder Marilyn James to this day continues to hold this territory for her people. I am a Bashkir woman, so I am an Indigenous person, but I am an immigrant and settler and grateful to be here with you today. I'm a program director for Preparing Our Home. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lily.
And I will pass it on to Taya. Or maybe Audrey, since her video is on already.
Thank you, Lily. So my name is Audrey. I'm from Prescott Russell, which is the area between Ottawa and Montreal. I'm working for United Way. I'm the regional director for this community, and I'm also the subject matter experts for emergency management, and more specifically how to coordinate the work with the community sectors and how we can better respond to emergencies, as they are often left behind in terms of emergencies. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm calling from the Anishinaabe territory, and thank you for welcoming me. And I'm going to pass it on to, if Taya is back. Are you there, Taya? Okay.
I am. Yeah, sorry, I was having some audio issues. Yes, but my name is Taya Trifo, and I'm the network coordinator with a nonprofit called Climate West. And we work in treaties 1 through 8, as well as 10 in the prairie provinces. And our goal is to really support communities in climate adaptation, and emergency preparedness is part of that. But yeah, currently I'm on the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. I'm just here visiting in Vancouver. So yes, but happy to be a part of this group and to see you all today. And I'll also just quickly mention, I actually read a lot of Lily's work for my thesis. And so I've been really exposed to your research, and I really appreciate the contributions that you bring to the field, and essentially centering equity. I really appreciate your work. So
Thank you so much, Taya.
Great. So I think we just have, Scott, who hasn't had a chance to introduce himself. And I apologize, my son keeps interloping into my office. So Scott, are you able to, are you there? If you're able to, would you like to introduce yourself? Okay. So maybe Scott, if you want, you can also introduce yourself in the chat. So I think we'll get us started. So thank you everyone so much for introducing us. It's so lovely to learn more about who you are and what's behind the name on the screen and the face. So really, I mean, without further ado, we have we have a special guest session today on Indigenous youth engagement and leadership in emergency preparedness and community resilience. Earlier this year, I was doing some outreach work for our youth climate grief project and in BC, and then I came across Preparing Our Home, an organization based in British Columbia that works to enable Indigenous youth across the country to reach their potential in becoming emergency preparedness leaders in their communities. And of course, when I saw it, I reached right away out to Lily, and it was really lovely to meet her. And then I was just simply in awe of everything that you've been doing, the organization has been doing, lifting up young people and Indigenous communities, really across the country to become emergency preparedness leaders and knowledge keepers, in their communities. So so I'm so excited to introduce Lilia Yumagalava, who's the program director, and Santana Drever, who is the youth leader and board member. To our session here today. Lilia and Santana, I wanted to just offer you as well. Is there anything else you wanted to offer as an introduction in addition to what you already shared?
I think we're good to jump in. Thank you.
You're good to jump in? Fantastic. I'm just going to share in chat as well the link to the Preparing Our Home. Their website was to have all the different reports and highlights all the work that they've been doing. So what I'm going to do, I am going to now stop sharing, and I am going to hand it over to you, Lily and Santana, to share with us all the work and all the things they've been doing. Oh, Lily, you're muted.
Yes, absolutely. Here we go. I'm just going to figure out where that PowerPoint is. Okay. I believe you can see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay, so first, full acknowledgement that the work that we're sharing today belongs to the youth leaders and the elders and the knowledge keepers and the communities that we're presenting. So this work is theirs. We have permission to share this work. Last night, I started putting some of the logos of the nations, and then we worked with over 90 communities. It's impossible, so I just stopped right there. This is just some of the highlights today that we'll go through in terms of the work that's been done through the program. In particular, Astrid suggested that we focus on mapping, community mapping. So that's the focus. There are many things we could have focused within the presentation, but that's the one that we'll be focusing on today. Right. So we'll walk through Indigenous emergency management. That looks quite different than emergency management, the conventional emergency management, and really grateful to have people from the Caribou. The Caribou has been disproportionately impacted over the years, and obviously throughout British Columbia, really great that there is a strong representation throughout British Columbia. But my heart goes out to everybody who's dealing with wildfires, floods, and displacement and the smoke. We'll talk briefly about Preparing Our Home as a program, and then we'll focus on some of the examples throughout across Turtle Island, really, on the different mapping that has been done in communities. So today, I would like to ask you really to sit back and really lean in. So this beautiful image, which we co-developed with the Squamish Ocean Canoe family, a family that's very close to Santana as well. And this is their canoe. So when we enter the space of the canoe, we each have a role. We each have a certain set of skills that will carry us forward as a group. And community resilience is just that. As I was listening to your introductions, I could hear partnerships and collaborations and working across. And that is the essence of community resilience work. So really grateful for the work that you do across the country, and just step into the canoe today. We'll be using this metaphor throughout. And with that, I'll pass it on to Santana.
Thank you, Lily, for the introduction. So this slide is some artwork that I did with Joshua Powis Stickley, and kind of going off what Lily said with the canoe. She asked us to do artwork based on the elder and youth sharing circles, focused on language revitalization across Turtle Island. And so we both sat down with Elder Cheokston, who has been involved with preparing our home, and we had decided on the canoe, living out west in British Columbia for the past few years as a guest. I've really embraced the teachings of the canoe and kind of paddling together with one heart and one mind. So this is what we came up with to kind of embody that teaching of working together and moving forward. Next slide, please. So what is emergency management? First is prevention and mitigation. So we take activities where there's known hazards and their projected impacts and work to mitigate those. Moving into preparedness, which is what preparing our home really focuses on. And then despite our efforts, there's still going to be emergencies and hazards. So there's response and then recovering from those emergencies. And I really like this slide because it kind of shows the model of preparing our home with starting with our own home, which I think really empowers Indigenous people and youth to take their autonomy and self-determination back with what we can do in our own homes to prepare and be emergency leaders. Next slide, please. So building resilience in communities through nation-to-nation learning. So a lot of these pictures are from preparing our home and the gatherings in different communities. So it really shows the mentorship from youth and peer mentoring. So I really like all of these pictures because it shows what's really important when it comes to emergency management, which is like protecting the land and Indigenous people practicing their traditions. So flaying the fish or horseback riding or being out by the water, smoking meat, all of these things can help people feel closer to home and help build their resiliency through emergencies. So that's really what preparing our home is focused on, the intergenerational aspects of mentorship and peer-to-peer learning as well. Next slide, please. So in nation-to-nation learning, a lot of these pictures are people who have been involved with preparing our home, youth from around Turtle Island. And what's really cool about preparing our home is that there's people from throughout Turtle Island. So you really get to learn from other Indigenous people, what they do in their communities, how they empower their youth, but also more cultural stuff as well. I learned so much from the other youth and the elders and the mentors. So I think preparing our home is a really good place to learn from other nations because it's such an open, warm space. And it's really cool to see what other nations are doing and to not really like repeat the wheel, but share and work together to empower Indigenous communities in emergency management. Next slide, please. So I've already been speaking about it, but preparing our home has gathered over 90 plus nations in Osuyus. And I really love this picture of Elder Darlene. She's such a powerhouse and she brings such a calming energy with so much experience in emergency management, being a leader in Siksika. And yeah, just meeting different youth who all are interested in protecting their communities and protecting the land, and just learning together, really. So the national gathering usually takes place in the fall in Osuyus. Here is a picture of all of us learning in one of the ballrooms, but it's really nice when we get to go outside, and there's always the joke of this horse Custer. It was such a funny horse ride. I'm from the prairies, so horseback riding in the desert with rattlesnakes was really funny, and like a memory I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And everyone there will never forget it either. But also this, if you look in the back of this bottom picture, there's Sherry, one of our board members and leaders in her community. Took us down to the water to kind of just have a moment of stillness. And this is what I really like about preparing our home as well, is that we talk about really heavy things in emergency management, but taking the time together as community to kind of center and ground and really empower each other is really what I think the gathering is about. And yeah, connecting with the land, I can't stress that more than enough with this gathering. Everyone has such a passion for the land and for community and for, yeah, just keeping people safe and making people feel empowered and connected. So yeah, next slide, please. And this is our board members, our beautiful matriarchs. So we'll start on the left with Darlene from Siksika, and then Roseanne from the Navajo Nation, Alana from Mi'kmaq people, myself, Soto and Cree from Saskatchewan, and then Sherry from Williams Lake in British Columbia, and Michelle, who works in fire in Saskatchewan. So I really love all of these women, and I think it's really important to empower women in emergency management. I can't really remember where this quote came from, but it stuck with me for a while. And it's, when you take care of the land takes care of you. And Indigenous women being the backbone of Indigenous communities, I think our jobs as stewards of the land and as matriarchs, it's really important to be in those leadership positions and in decision-making spaces as it was traditionally. So when I see this picture, I feel really empowered, and I feel like we're decolonizing practices where emergency management can be really male dominated, but traditionally in Indigenous communities, our women, we're protectors really, and the backbone of raising our youth, which is what preparing our home really does focus on, is empowering youth as well. So I can't put my hands up enough to these women and Lily and Jonathan and the rest of the Preparing Our Home family. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll pass it back to Lily.
Thank you so much, Santana. I always learn from you when I listen to you speak. Thank you so much for the leadership that you bring this space in so many levels, I wanted to start this following on what Santana just spoke about the matriarchs. I wanted to start, this is one of my most favorite pictures from all the gatherings. And this is a Siksika Blackfoot youth, Astokumi, and Astokumi Smith, and Nachalnut youth from a Hausut First Nation, Ashiel Thomas. And they are on the Osoyoos Indian Band territories. And this is a beautiful artwork. So an Indigenous woman working on the land. And this just offers so much when we talk about assets and resources and all these kind of English words. This speaks to so much, the role of women that they played in maintaining the community safety throughout Indigenous existence, and to what extent these roles have been taken away, and the way we are bringing them back. So I just wanted to share this as an opening as we walk through the mapping segment of the presentation. As Santana said, there are many aspects, and I keep using this photo because I just think it's so perfect. That horse was so difficult and so poorly trained, and Santana just sitting there with grace and power And it is a powerful metaphor, I think, for emergency management system, which is very much top-down, controlled, like it's awkward, it's like, and yet you have to walk through it with grace and power. And I think this photo is also a really important one because it shows the mapping that happens in the communities and the photography work that we do, as well as the drone training. So I will just talk about them in depth about the mapping component. So first, I wanted to give credit to where the credit goes. This is exceptional work by Sheena Charles, who is preparing our home leader in Stanley Mission, Saskatchewan, which is a northern Saskatchewan community. It's a community that has many challenges, and wildfires being one of them, as long as many other social emergencies as well. So what she did, she brought her mentor, Michelle Van der Voort, who is the manager for Saskatchewan First Nations Emergency Managers, to talk about fire safety. And one of the most important things that a youth can learn is creating a fire escape plan. So this was an enormous gym packed in Stanley Mission. And when Michelle was speaking, as she always shares, you could hear the pin drop. So there is such interest in this when you have one of you sharing the stories, when it's not just some person from another community or something like that, but when it's one of your leaders sharing your stories. And this is one of the models, that the main model that we have is that the youth are trained by the mentors and then they take that knowledge back. And these are just some of the photos of different mapping that community did. I'll speak. Now we're traveling to Ontario, Curve Lake First Nation. So this was beautiful work. We worked with the lands department. So they created this amazing laminated black and white map. And on that, the youth mapped all the important bits. For example, where are the elders that would need door-to-door notification in case of the emergency? Where is the wild rice patches, right? Like, where are the angry dogs? All of these things that we don't necessarily think about. This is a population growth chart, right? Like how the community is growing. For most of these youth, most of them, as long as they remember, they've been on the boiled water advisory. It's a community right next to a town called Peterborough. But as one of the youth said, and that forever stayed with me, it said, Lily will be okay with water in the emergency because then they bring the bottled water and so on in. It's the daily life that's difficult. And I think that's the context we really need to think about. What is an emergency and how long do they last, and who defines what they are? This is incredible work by Melody Charlie. She goes by the name First Nations photographer. She is exceptional. She's one of the photography mentor within our programs. And this is actually work that was done in her community. So she's in Chalmers. She's from Ahousaht, but she lives in Ukulele First Nation. And as you can see, here is the hand-drawn map. We work with intergenerational data. This is the hand-drawn map. This is the tsunami marker. This is the GIS, that amazing Tucci, I forget her first name. She did as part of their work at the Nation. And this is the drone footage that we took with the youth. And as you can see, this was the historic return of the herring on the day that we were filming. So it was amazing. We had this paddle carving workshop, this and that. Everybody dropped everything and ran towards the water, got in their canoes and went harvesting the eggs. It was really beautiful, things that truly matter. And then obviously elder stories. It's really, stories are data and we need to treat them. It's a very, very important source of knowledge and we need to treat it as such. Going back to Ontario again, Northern Ontario community this time, the exceptional work by Bijun Indigenous cause Devin Neviu, who is a counselor in the community. So they have a beautiful harmony framework that they developed to lead their governance and land use planning and economic development. And as part of that, they also did Indigenous value mapping. So they mapped the land, they walked the land, they connected to GIS imagery. How do we use all this land for different purposes at different times of the year? And then they can use that database to push back on the mining development and to say, no, this is what we want. This is how important these portage areas are, or berry patches, or sacred burial spaces and things like that. So it's a really important domain of Indigenous value mapping where nations map what's important to them and why. This is, again, traveling to Alberta now, Siksika Nation, the beautiful work by Darlene Yellow, Old Woman Monroe, and Stokely Smith. Some of you may remember the 2013 floods. There was so much damage in the community. Over 1,000 people were evacuated, which is a lot. There is many houses were destroyed, bridges were washed out. It was enormous, enormous damage. And in that damage, Darlene created the Dancing Deer Disaster Recovery Center, which went and assisted evacuees whether they were in teepees or RVs or motels, hotels. So for several years following the displacement, they brought those services to the community, and they brought them in a culturally safe way. They spoke Blackfoot, they understood the culture, and they were multidisciplinary. So for example, a youth worker would come with a nurse to deliver services. So the evacuees didn't have to go seek out and navigate the bureaucracy. No, it came to your home, however temporary your home was. And so as part of the Preparing Our Home workshop, youth really mapped the community. It's quite a large community, one of the larger reserves in Canada. So they mapped, right? Like where are the access points? What happens if the bridges are washed out? Where are the mint patches? Where is all this good stuff happening? And where are some of the hazards and risks? And what was really beautiful, because Darlene is a Blackfoot speaker, they also connected that to the language. And that's really important. And it happens every time it's possible, it happens. Not every community has that capacity, but when we can, we do connect mapping also to the language, because it's a map, right? Indigenous language is truly a map to the land and the values and the uses. This is beautiful work by Casey Gabriel and Sandy Henry of Lillooet Nation. This is Casey right here. So they developed at the Hetfield School, they developed the Indigenous community resilience curriculum. And when we think about emergency preparedness, we often think about personal preparedness. They took it further into family preparedness and community preparedness. First aid course, the youth at the school took a first aid course. They're quite remarkably certified, actually. There was a firefighting boot camp in partnership with Finesse, but also they did herbology and traditional medicine. Casey did amazing fun food preservation, as well as elder stories and asset mapping and hazard mapping. So that really speaks just how different and how fun and how much more holistic preparedness can be in communities. So this is the hazard and asset mapping component. We have partnered with Sony Canada, and they donated us some equipment. So the youth have a chance to go around, but now with cell phones, it's really easy for those who have cell phones. They took the photos of critical assets in the communities, like the fire station, the health center, the youth center, the assembly points, and things like that. Then they mapped them in comparison to where they're located and what other important things are on the land. As part of this mapping process, the youth, it became very clear that there is just one road in and one road out of the community, right? So which is a death trap in an evacuation scenario. So they identified a second access road that was a kind of like forestry service road, but that has been blocked by boulders, most likely by the forestry industry. So we wrote a letter to the province to clear that the road and so on and so forth. So there was that second access road. It's all-terrain vehicles only, so it's not everybody can get out, but at least now there is another way out. So, and that is the really important power of the youth voices that are based on the knowledge that they carry. Another really fun thing that they did this long hazard identification process. So they went and identified everything that can happen, from paranormal activities to World War III, the train derailment, zombie apocalypse, no Wi-Fi, all of these things that youth perceived as hazards. And we'll watch the video at the end if we have time about that. And then they ranked them, like more of a structured hazard assessment. And the youth came up with what are the top hazards. And the community safety officer was present throughout the workshop. And he said, this is so accurate. We go through all these consulting processes and all of that to identify that, where we can just have a group of youth observe and map out, right? What are the key challenges? But then also some other things that normally don't make it into risk assessment, like angry dogs, came over and over again. It's a major issue. How do you create a bylaw around that, right? Like, how do you deal with that? Also, youth as a highly mobile and connected subgroup, they see the world a little differently, right? So that's really important asset in itself. And I can't stress enough, this is just a recent workshop, just happened in May this year. So this work belongs to Nathaniel Papiquash from Key First Nation, and he is with the Yorkton Tribal Council in Saskatchewan. Brilliant work, fire escape mapping. So just finding that in case of emergency, how do you get out of your house as fast as possible? It saves lives. We know that Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by fires. So fire fatalities are 10 times higher than the Canadian average. So this is an important component of the program, and wherever possible, it's kind of the starting point. And then everybody got a smoke detector as well. So he did it in 6 communities across the tribal council. Great work. And as Santana stressed in the beginning, the culture is really important. So it's not just like, and I want to share a story that Devon shared here because I think it's really powerful. So paddle carving is just one of the main components of the program. And Devon, who never carved a paddle in his life, he came to the gathering, he started carving this paddle, and he's just a master. He aced it. It was perfect, as if it's like laser cut. And what he said forever stayed with me. What he said, it's as if I knew it and it just came back. And that's exactly how emergency preparedness is for many of the communities. This is the knowledge that traditionally has been held in communities for millennia. For different colonial reasons and otherwise, this knowledge has been taken away. The adaptive strategies have been taken away. So really what we work on is bringing that back. Things that people already know that's in them. And just this image from Squamish Ocean Canoe Family, again, like as you can see, every paddle is absolutely different. Every graduate of our program is absolutely different, and they do different things. Santana is a classic example of the exceptional power that youth can bring to this program. So she did her training in policy and political science, and now she's working at this high-level policy level, setting this the policy for Indigenous peoples in BC in emergency management. We often talk about deficit-focused. When we talk about emergency management on reserves, we're always like, you know, this is lacking, especially the colonial narrative. Our program really goes into strength-based approach. We first and foremost, we map what is working, what are the assets that are already here. The other thing, there is a ton of judgment and labeling, the language that's used and so on and so forth. When Indigenous peoples deliver emergency services, they are trauma informed. They live through these traumas. They know what they're working with, and that's really important. Often we think like, oh, Indigenous peoples doing this thing like homogenous group. No, every single, just like this paddle, every graduate is different. Every community needs are different. Every community's assets are different. So recognizing the entire spectrum of capacity is really important. Unfortunately, the way the funding system set up in Canada for emergency management, it forces communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, basically to compete against each other. We really try to work from this space of collaborative nations collaborating together to build better futures, safer futures. Often we talk about knowledge instruction. Well, quickly tell me that, right? Like really it has to come from a space of this reciprocity, and youth are ideal to lead that space of reciprocity, but all of your organizations as well have a great role to play in bringing that agency, voice, and ownership. And the whole experience of community, right? Like really looking at that. I'm using the word research here, probably not the right word here, but really understanding, right? Like understanding that's relational and accountable, set in a space of relations. Then the language we use, you know, like we often use stakeholders, which is a highly colonial word. So really using the right language to describe the roles, rights holders, right? That's what we're really working with. Okay, and just as we wrap up here, just some of the lessons we learned throughout the years, I guess, there is real need to consider multiple hazards. So not just slow onset, but really rapid onset as well as loss of language and teenage pregnancies. Whatever the emergency is that's happening in the community, that's what we need to be paying attention, not whatever the funding stream is dictating us or whatever else that's kind of top down. long-term climate change risks and opportunities. So communities like not just coming from this deficit angle, but again, looking, okay, so things are different, fundamentally will be different. So what do we look like? How do we work on water storage, for example, drought becoming a larger and larger issues that we're seeing over the years in communities. First Nations communities are uniquely positioned for community-based planning. People know each other, which sometimes brings problems, no question, but it's a really unique opportunity to really enact the whole of community, like whole of society, all these Sendai words that are really happening. We need to acknowledge, give the credit where it belongs. First Nations are the first responders, and they have been leaders in adaptation since time immemorial. This knowledge is deeply important for settler communities as well, right? So working with that from that space of respect is really important. And I can't say enough about the youth. Exceptional people that I've met throughout the program, people that I learn a lot from, like Santana. And youth are catalysts for change, but what we found over the years, this work has to be intergenerational. It's really hard for youth in their communities to start moving the mountains. So what's really helpful is when a youth is paired with a mentor, somebody who knows how to work the politics and all of that and funding or whatever. So that's really important, that mentorship component that Santana spoke. In the program, we really start with the Indian Act and the colonial impacts. So the displacement, the intergenerational trauma, the access roads that, like I shared in Lillooet, that don't exist. The fact that there are no dikes, that settler communities are protected, and you know, the Indigenous communities are left vulnerable across the country. This happened because they weren't a priority, the funding formula, and so on and so forth. And it's not ideal, the dike, but still the standard, how do we bring up that standard of protection? And then pandemic really helped us to connect emergency management really with public health, but also economic development and education. So that's one thing that is brilliant in Indigenous communities. It's not as siloed as it is in settler communities in terms of emergency management. Looking at multiple co-benefits, one community in particular comes to mind. They lost over 30% of their infrastructure in wildfire. So pre-disaster recovery planning, that you know you're going to lose this poor housing stock. How do you bring it back and better? So when they applied for funding, they got enough funding money just for the same trailer homes with, you know, like poor, you know, very poor stock of housing. They pushed back and they said, no, we want hardy planks, we want steel roof, we want these houses to be safe long-term. And really moving in this place from the space of inherent rights and inherent strengths. And for people on the call, like I think any cultural training that you can take, not necessarily from a big institution with some certificate, but to sit with people and to learn from them directly. I think that's a really powerful and important thing to do to build understanding and bridges. So we just have a video to watch, but before that, I just wanted to thank you all for coming and listening to us today. Santana, thank you for stepping into the space. That was brilliant. And we will be open to any questions that you may have. So I'll just stop share and we can watch the video if we have time.
Thank you so much, Lily and Santana. And I think like as you said, I think like we here, you know, at Tamarack, we have the we call it the asset-based community development, but I think really it is Indigenous knowledge-based community development in its true essence. And perhaps like the asset-based is kind of like quite a colonial way. I think you're very right to point out as well, so much of the language is very, it's very colonial, that perhaps we should rename it as knowledge-based community development instead. You know, moving forward. Thank you so much. It was so amazing to hear. So I'll share the video and then we'll take some questions. So so you guys have opportunity to ask Lily and Santana. So
it's a short video, and just to bring the youth voices in here directly, I think it's worth a watch. Thank you.
I watched the video too. It's really awesome. Okay, so let me just try and get that going. And I just have to make sure that I'm sharing sound. I am sharing sound. And are you able to see the screen okay? Yeah, so let's give it a go.
earthquake, mudslide, rock slide, terrorist attack, alien abduction, no Wi-Fi, zombie attack, power outage, train derailment, car crash, rains, lava, World War III, and no food. Nuclear plant, diseases, protest, yeah. Bombs, murder, assassin, tornado, flash flood, tsunami, and spies. Avlanda, avalanche, Philly, yeah. Poison gas, angry dogs, bridge out, yeah. Lizards, meteor shower, evil clowns, and rabies.
Rock slide, house fire, forest fire, landslide, flood, power outage, volcano, electrical, propane leak, communicable disease, water shortage, internet, icy road, snow day, earthquake, heat wave, air quality, road closures, train derailment, angry dogs, terrorism, accidents, vehicle, collapsed bridge or building, acid rain, tsunami.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Let me just see if I can stop sharing some. There we go. Thank you so much. So I wanted to ask, does anybody, would anybody like to ask Lily and Santana some questions about that, you know, the various amazing projects that have been happening?
I have a question. That's all right. So Dave had to take off. He had to go to a meeting. So in listening to your presentation, I was seeing a lot of leadership when it came to the Indigenous governments, the First Nations governments. And I also at the beginning heard a lot around collaboration. And so, you know, as working for a municipal government that also collaborates quite a bit with First Nations and our regional district, I'm trying to think of what our role is. Like, we have a number of surrounding First Nations communities that probably would collaborate quite a bit with our regional district. We are a service area for many First Nations communities, but the territories aren't within our municipality other than Tlekal. So I'm trying to think of what our role is in supporting, or what our role might be in supporting youth as they take these leadership roles in their community in preparedness.
And Tana, please go ahead if you would like.
You got this one.
All right. Well, thank you for that question, Natalie. I think it's a really important one. So some of our graduates basically became the ESS liaison between the nation and the neighboring municipalities, like thinking about Strathmore and the work that Astokami does in Alberta, right? So that's one role, is just creating the spaces of leadership and also compensating youth for their knowledge and the work. You know, like in emergency management, we place a lot of expectations on volunteering. Indigenous peoples, Indigenous youth, and I shouldn't be speaking this broadly, but a lot of people that I met, they don't have the capacity to volunteer. They just don't have the same financial footing. They don't have the same privileges. So compensating youth for their exceptional knowledge and the heart that they bring to this work is really important. And the other thing, have them at your planning table. Make sure that, you know, like, it's not just all the critical infrastructure operators or whatever, health, like all these regular lists. Have you reached out to the local youth center? You know, like, have you reached out to the school? And so that it's not just non-Indigenous staff representing, but actual Indigenous youth listening and learning, and also you learning from them. That is the biggest thing. If you invite them, actually listen to them. So no tokenism, because there will be one attendance and they will not return. So there's just, people are very busy. They have very busy life. They need to build their careers. So listening to them is like most critically first thing that you can do, I think. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Lily. Did anybody else have a question they would like to ask? It's a unique opportunity here for us being all together here, and we have Santana and Lily, so. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just really interested in the presentation from the youth in the video about all the different ideas they had of the emergencies, potential emergencies in their communities. And I noticed that some of them, the emergencies were quite silly. And I've worked with youth for many, many years. And I wonder if that's something that you've noticed, that almost like as a coping mechanism, people use humor to try to lighten the mood a little bit and just to keep going. Just wonder if you've noticed anything like that, or if you've have any observation about how they keep going, because this is tough stuff to talk about.
And that's why I think it's really important to be supported through this process, and to have somebody who has dealt with it professionally, and and also at a family level. I think the losses that Indigenous youth are seeing in their communities are unimaginable for an average Canadian youth, unfortunately. Like one of the communities that we're working with over the pandemic, they lost 70 youth. It's a small remote community, 70 youth are gone. Right, so you're dealing with funeral one after another. So the substance use crisis that's happening, that comes from intergenerational trauma. And I think that is one important thing. Yes, coping humor, absolutely. People are talking about death and destruction, and like Darlene, as Santana said, she's always smiling. A residential school survivor, she's been through so much in her life. She's always smiling. Yes, absolutely, humor and coping. But also the baseline is just so fundamentally different of what these youth deal with from early days, right? So I'm thinking about people who went into paramedic careers because, they had to deal with that in their homes with their immediate relatives, right? And things like that. So yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma and where that suffering is coming from. Santana, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add from the Indigenous youth perspective. I did grow up in my community, Kiniston Soto Nation, which has about 300 people, and I am the daughter of 2 Indian residential school survivors. So I've seen and been through a lot growing up in my community, and I will say that having programs like Preparing Our Home is how that resiliency stays strong, because you see people who are doing things in their community making a difference, and you're networking, you're making friends with people who care about the same things as you. So it can be really disheartening sometimes, but I think youth are so strong, and with that 7th generation thinking and being like the first generation survivor of my family, like I know there's a big responsibility, and I think Indigenous peoples have always stood up to that responsibility. So although it's hard, I think making connections through programs like this is what helps build community resiliency and just personal empowerment. Like Lily said, the disproportionate things that Indigenous youth deal with in the country is really unfortunate. But I think through connecting to culture or whatever like speaks to you really helps. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Santana. Taya, did you want to maybe ask a question? I saw you came on the camera too.
Oh, I'm just here to be present. Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation that's happening. Yeah, and I just feel like that internal empowerment piece is so important. So I'm really grateful to hear more about how you're doing that. Yeah, I sit on a couple of calls where like they're doing an external consultant kind of oriented vulnerability assessment process, and the point that you raised, Lily, about how youth through their lived experience are inherently kind of able to pull out a lot of those same things that I've you sit in these like 8-hour calls and you kind of reach the same perspectives, but it's a little bit more narrow than I think what you've been able to offer through this research. So I think I just wanted to express how cool I think it is and how important I think it is. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Taya.
And just to reflect, like we're still not doing enough as a program to bring the self-care piece. These women, like literally, like in that photo that was in the lake, like when Sherry took us down to the lake, these are people that dealt with some of the most, like the mass shooting event in northern Saskatchewan, right? Like one of the women standing there, she was the incident command for that event, right? Like, so these are people that have been holding so much pain in their communities, and they're going nonstop because it's one emergency after another. So we still need to do a lot more, Santana. And I hope this gathering coming up, Santana is coming back to deliver a tabletop exercise. And as part of that tabletop exercise, I hope we have built-in self-care component, right? It's not about ICS understanding all of this. How are you feeling? Like, do you need a bit of a break, and how do you build that in, right? Like as you're responding to this multiple day emergencies, some communities had their EOC activated for months, right? Like, so how do you build in that space of self-care? So we still learn. Realm. Thank you, Taya, for that comment, because it really brought it back that we need to do more on that, Santana, as we move through the exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to share this space with you, and I really thank Lily and Santana for coming. So I just wanted to quickly wrap up. We are a little bit over time. I just wanted to share one more thing with you. We have an opportunity to contribute to our equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and reconciliation work here at Tamarack. So 2 ways. You can, as Tamarack members, if you want to, that you're participating in various forums and with Tamarack, you can join our focus groups and interviews and surveys. And another important part is we're actually creating a community of practice similar to this space, but it's meant for Black, Indigenous, and racialized members. It's really a safe space and a safe environment, for people to come into, because we know that there are perhaps not spaces where they can come into and that are not really designed for them and that are safe. And my colleague Rochelle, who is here on the call with us as well, she is leading up that work. So if you're interested, please reach out to Rochelle. So her email is rochelle@tamarackcommunity.ca. And I think that is all for today. I'm just going to share one last little thing, if you don't mind. I will post a little survey link. If you could share with us your feedback, what you thought of today's session, that would be so lovely. And I wish you all the best. Be well, be safe, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for hosting, Astrid.
Yes, thank you, Astrid and Lily, and yes.
You're welcome. And then we'll send an email as well with all this information as well, like Rochelle's email and on the different links and links to the video and all of that, and the PowerPoints and everything. So have wonderful days, afternoons, evenings, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You.